Hello everyone, I'm Michael, and today, I'm going to tell you a story. Teachers of Reddit, what was the worst thing you had to confiscate from a student? Story 1. My mom has had stories about what she's confiscated from lower elementary aged students, K3. The usual prank items like whoopee cushions, sure. But one time a student was playing with this weird box. The box was locked, so she couldn't put it in the confiscated bin. She put it on top of a cabinet. About an hour later, it starts ringing. Furiously. It took some doing to get the box open. Turns out, this kid's parent was a professional chef. So the kid had grabbed every timer in the house, set them for the max amount of time, locked the box, brought it to school, and played with it so it would get confiscated and ring loudly. Whole class erupted with laughter and screaming. A true agent of chaos. Story 2. Preschool teacher here. I had to convince a 4-year-old that his mom's wedding ring should go into a special box on the front desk instead of on the finger of a 6-year-old girl he had a crush on. Later, he brought in his dad's car keys and a bottle opener. Story 3. My wife is a teacher, and one of her first graders brought her 2 hard seltzers because her mom said they're good after a long day, and she deserved them. Story 4. The weirdest one was definitely the fish in a vase they found during locker checks. It was in an unassigned locker someone had added a lock to. Inside was a live bed of fish in about as large a vase as you can fit in a locker. Fully decorated. Someone had clipped a little book light to the top of the vase, presumably so fish wasn't in the dark all the time. No one claimed to know whose it was or how long it had been there, so it lived in the coach's office for at least that year. Story 6. When I was in 5th grade, there was an active market in live bees. Some kids figured out that the weight of the average 5th grader briefly stepping on a bee in the grass would stun it for about a minute without actually killing it. They started going out in teams to scout bees on the field, stun them, and carefully scoop them into plastic sandwich bags. They'd then sell them to other students who'd release them in classrooms to waste class time and scare people. You could get honeybees for 25 cents apiece. Bumblebees and yellow jackets cost more. Teachers and school admins started cracking down on this. Teachers literally confiscated live bees in plastic bags from students when found, and they eventually had to start having someone watch the field to catch students in the act. Story 7. When I was in 5th grade, there was an active market in live bees. Some kids figured out that the weight of the average 5th grader briefly stepping on a bee in the grass would stun it for about a minute without actually killing it. They started going out in teams to scout bees on the field, stun them, and carefully scoop them into plastic sandwich bags. They'd then sell them to other students who'd release them in classrooms to waste class time and scare people. You could get honeybees for 25 cents apiece. Bumblebees and yellow jackets cost more. Teachers and school admins started cracking down on this. Teachers literally confiscated live bees in plastic bags from students when found, and they eventually had to start having someone watch the field to catch students in the act. Story 8. My mom always told the story about my brother bringing a signed picture of Richard Petty to his class and telling everyone he was his dad, 1 to 2nd grade maybe, but that everyone forgot because the next kid pulled out an antique gun. Story 9. My beyond innocent sister was sent to the principal's office for bringing a dildo to school and making an obscene gesture with it to her teacher. What actually happened was she was drinking these weird protein shots to bulk up for cheerleading or something we'd gotten from Costco, which came in a long, pink, fairly phallic tubes, kind of like this. When her teacher got mad and was like, "What is this?" my sister honestly said it's a protein shot and gestured to drink it. Story 10. Confiscated 3 knives from one kid. But the weirdest thing was a porn video from a 9-year-old girl. She brought it to school to show off to the boys. Took it from her grandfather's stash. Big tit fantasies and anal desires. Had to read it to the short-sighted 60-year-old vice principal. I was 21 at the time. Story 11. I taught 1st grade and confiscated a piece of a broken beer bottle from a 6-year-old. It really surprised me because he was the sweetest kid. Turns out another classmate asked him to bring a weapon and hide it in the playground sand so that he could get back at another kid. I tried to do more life lesson things than suspension for both boys. BC, they're freaking 6. But school policy had them both suspended for a few days. Story 12. Not a teacher, but I watched quite a funny confiscation while in detention as a sophomore in high school. I was reading a book, just trying to make the time go by when our vice principal, who was monitoring detention that day, stepped out for a moment. All of a sudden, I hear a cracking sound, and I look up from my book to see a broken egg on the floor. The few kids in the room look around at each other confused. Nobody owns up to it, and nobody knows who did it because we were all distracted when it happened. The vice principal returns, doesn't notice the egg. But he's so engrossed in his paperwork that this kid still gets away with throwing another egg. Everyone looks up. The VP asks what that noise was, and this kid holds up a broken pencil and apologizes. Everyone goes back to minding their business, but all the students now know who the culprit is. Finally, this kid throws one last egg, but unfortunately the VP looked up from his papers right as he threw it. He walked over to the kid's desk, asked him what he thought he was doing, and the kid goes just cracking jokes. VP holds out his hand and the kid reveals an entire carton of eggs from under his sweatshirt and hands it to him. VP looked so unfazed that I honestly wondered what else that man has seen. I was honestly glad I got detention that day. Story 13. Not a teacher, but I'm half deaf and my music teacher took my hearing aid and refused to accept that it wasn't an earbud. Then he yelled at me for the rest of the class for not playing in tune. Couldn't exactly tell how well I was playing since I could hear it. Story 14. Not a teacher, but this is the worst thing I had confiscated. It was 1984, and I was 9 years old. Back then it was common for parents to buy loads of fireworks for November 5th in Britain, Guy Fawkes Night. I got a load of them on around November 1st and emptied them into a cardboard toilet roll that I'd sealed up at one end. Made a fuse from blue tooth paper and stuck it in, then used masking tape to seal the top. I was 9 years old. I took it to school and was showing a kid in class during a lesson. The teacher, a guy in his 60s, saw I was distracting people so called me up and asked what it was. I explained, and he confiscated it. At the end of the day, he called me over, told me not to bring things like that into school and then gave it back to me. And that was the end of the matter, until I set it off a few days later and it set fire to a hedge. Kids, the 80s really were a different time. Story 15. So right out of uni, about 25-ish, I took a job teaching at a school in the capital of our country. Lots of poverty, and the level of education was low in these teenagers. First day on the job, a kid takes out this hacking knife and starts attacking the furniture with it. For some weird reason, I just walked up to him and demanded he'd give it to me, which worked. But it just as easily could have not worked. During the same job, I also had multiple conversations with students about how sexual misconduct towards the teacher, me, isn't okay. I also got locked in a classroom with 10 angry male students, including the one from the knife incident. In the end, I left because the administration didn't back me up. Story 16. Some kids were into petrol gas sniffing, but found it hard to transport and keep hidden, so they learned how to make napalm so they could carry it hidden in their bags. I had to lock down the whole school and get hazmat in to dispose of it. And how did they find out how to make it? They asked one of the science teachers, and he told them. Story 17. Not necessarily the craziest thing to confiscate, but the effect that confiscating the item had on the student was pretty upsetting. For background, I am an elementary special education teacher for students with emotional disabilities and intense behaviors. These students have behaviors that range from yelling, throwing things, and leaving the classroom to students who have attempted suicide and students who have assaulted their peers or the school staff. I even had a student go for a cop's gun one time. The student in question was in first grade at the time and fairly low-key compared to some of the other kids I had. This student and I had a good relationship as I was one of the only male staff in the building. He lacked a reliable male figure in his life, and for the majority of his kindergarten year, I was the primary teacher working with him. One day my student had asked to use the restroom, and for most of my students, our staff will escort them to and from the restroom, so I went with him. Now, it's been several years, so the details are fuzzy, but somehow, it was brought to my attention that there was burnt toilet paper in the boys' restroom. I can't remember if my student or another student told me, but I want to say, it was my own student. This sets off some alarms in my head, so I contact my admin team so they're aware. As we're going forward with our day, I notice that my student is fidgety and messing with something in their jacket pocket. So I ask them if I can check their pocket, and instead of saying yes, He pulls out a little Bic lighter and tells me that he found it and asks me to keep it a secret. Of course, I can't just turn a blind eye, so I report it to my admin team and we sit down with the student to talk about fire safety. We explain how playing with lighters isn't safe and that he could hurt himself or others if he accidentally started a fire that got out of control. My student feels awful. He's apologizing and feeling remorseful. He admits to us that he had been messing around with lighters at home when his mom was sleeping. We contacted his mother to tell her what had happened and what he had told us, and her response was unfortunate. She was furious with us, told us there was no way that he had brought a lighter, and that it must have been planted by a peer, that we coerced a confession out of him, and that she was pulling him out of school immediately. Within a year, the family's house burned down, and my former student was severely burned in the fire. Story 18. Not mine, but my fiance's coworker confiscated a makeshift shank from a third grader, roughly 8 years old, made from a popsicle stick and a straw. He said he was going to use it on his animals at home. Best part was when they told the dad. He said, "Why did you give him supplies to make a shank? I assume he's gonna kill a few people in the future." Story 19. Again, the other way round. When I was about 10, I wrote a report on beer. I had written to lots of breweries to ask for beer labels and basically described each brewery a little bit. One of the brewery's beers was Verboten Frucht, named after the forbidden fruit. It had a picture of Adam and Eve on it. Well, Eve was quite interesting to all the boys, as you can imagine. Had that label confiscated. I also failed that report. Story 20. So far, a death letter that a severely antisocial student wrote after a minor incident with a peer. The letter told the student to kill themselves, to die already, etc., and depicted bloody/wrists. I truly think the student didn't intend to give the other student the letter because they never talked to anyone. But that was some fucked up shit to see from a kid. Story 21. My mom has been a primary teacher for her whole life now, in the UK, and the worst incident she had to deal with was with a girl aged 10, who was having issues with a boy, essentially bullying her. She told her dad, and her dad's solution was to give her a sawn-off shotgun to intimidate the boy. No one knew it was unloaded, but the hell it raised when a 10-year-old schoolgirl brings out a shotgun certainly put the boy off from ever coming near her again. Story 22. I work as a middle school language teacher. Every kid in class is assigned a Chromebook, and we are encouraged to have the kids work on them. I let them sit together to encourage them to help each other out while they do some work on their devices. I see 2 kids at the back of the class, giggling and just watching the screen. No reading or writing happening. I get up slowly, watch them panic, and start frantically clicking the mouse so as to close up the windows that weren't supposed to be open. I get to them and ask them what's funny. One of the kids says something about emails as I take the Chromebook from his desk. The only open tab is in fact the email. I sit down at a free desk close to his and use a trick I had just learned, which was to reopen tabs that had been recently closed. 1, twice, 3rd time's the charm. Full-on PNV pornographic video on screen. They found a way to bypass the school board security and were watching porn in class. So I guess the confiscation of a Chromebook